All right, let's bring in our panel this morning. Many of these folks have been up through the evening. Former GOP senior congressional aide and principal and founder of Rilex Strategies, Maria Cardona, a CNN political commentator and Democratic strategist, and of course the co-host of the podcast Hot Mics from Left to Right. We have Matt Mowers, the president of Valcor Global Strategy, former State Department senior White House advisor and GOP congressional nominee, and Ava McKend, who is CNN's national politics correspondent. Thank you all for being with us here this morning. Ava, you're a politics reporter, but having you here outside of the Capitol with us this morning, which we can't see the dome in the shot, but that's where we are, just for everyone who's watching, makes perfect sense because this story is all the same story. The story of Donald Trump, the story of these, hardline rogue type of congressional candidates who come here, create chaos. In many ways, this House was the leading indicator of how all of this kind of unfolded and went down. We did hear from Speaker McCarthy last night in what I honestly felt to me kind of like a swan song. He was standing up there sort of like, hey, this is the last chance I got with all these cameras pointed at me to say what I want to say. It went on for much longer than I expected. What stood out to you?
Well, Kasie, most consequentially, he said he would not run again. This is a man that has wanted this speakership, it seems like, his whole political career. And he said he's done. He also took aim at his enemies and, surprisingly, Democrats as well. That was sort of a bit of a confusing moment because it's not as if he asked Democrats to bail him out, but he suggested in his comments that he was expecting as much. He also said that he was grateful for the job, a very short speakership, 269 days, but called it a great honor, the honor of his lifetime. And he argued that he had no regrets. Let's listen.
I don't regret standing up for choosing governance over grievance. It is my responsibility. It is my job. I do not regret negotiating. Our government is designed to find compromise. I don't regret my efforts to build coalitions and find solutions. I was raised to solve problems, not create them. So I may have lost a vote today, but as I walk out of this chamber, I feel fortunate to have served the American people.
You know, the big question now, Kasie, who's going to replace Speaker McCarthy? Congressman Scalise seems to have the confidence of some of the right flank, but this could be a very painful process. We saw how painful it was to elect the speaker in the first place. We also see Congressman Jim Jordan, who chairs the House Judiciary Committee. He has been able to straddle good relationships with leadership as well as the MAGA movement in the party. And if not him, presumably Congressman Tom Emmer of Minnesota. He led the arm of the party responsible for electing House Republicans. So one could guess that he has relationships with Republicans across the spectrum, across the country. So now we'll see who's going to take up the mantle.
Although I should point out, Emmer did nod to Steve Scalise yesterday. He said, I think I made myself pretty clear. Yeah. Matt Mowers, you are someone who, Kevin McCarthy well. Mm-hmm. He helped support you in your bid for Congress, which, of course, you actually lost in the Republican primary, due in no small part to some of the factors that we are seeing play out here. And part of why Kevin McCarthy wanted you here was because he wants people, as he's said, who can govern. And there were eight members of his conference who basically said, no, we don't want to do that. And here we are. I mean, I'm still struck by the moment. I never imagined in covering this place, and I have for, over a decade now, that we would wake up one morning without a Speaker of the House because the people of that Speaker's party threw him out and had no plan to replace him. Talk a little bit about what Kevin McCarthy is like, what he was dealing with here, and what your takeaways are for what comes next.
Sure. Well, the first thing is that this was all laid in motion in November of last year. Right, when election night happened, it wasn't the big red wave, and it was only 222 Republican majority. That's when this became a very, very difficult job. And look, that was in no small part because of the types of candidates you had emerge in a number of these primaries. I mean, Kevin McCarthy wanted a majority, at least 10 seats more, 12 seats more than what he got. You have a lot of folks who didn't succeed because, whether it was Roe v. Wade decision, whether it was, Donald Trump announcing his presidential campaign essentially right before the general election last year. Right. So you actually had a number of Republicans in swing seats lose, you also had a lot of really lousy candidates. You had J.R. Majewski running against Marcy Kaptur in Ohio, who had no business being the nominee and wasn't able to succeed that way.
We can kind of shorthand them as MAGA candidates, really.
You probably could.
Yeah.
Not exclusively, but you probably could. You had Joe Kent, who beat Jamie Herrera Butler out in Washington State, had the incumbent member of Congress, who is a pragmatic, conservative Republican, won that primary. She'd be in Congress today. She would have been a nay vote on the motion to vacate. So that all got played out on November last year.
I mean, it is pretty remarkable, Rena. I mean, I remember talking to people on election night in the last round of midterm elections, counting what the speaker's majority was going to be, and having conversations with people about the possibility of something like this happening. Those conversations happened again when it took 15 votes to get him the speaker's gavel in the first place. You've worked inside this building. You understand what it's like to be somebody who's dealing with these kinds of things. The other speakers that came before, the other Republican speakers that came before Kevin McCarthy, they honestly got tired of it and basically up and quit because they couldn't handle this faction. McCarthy actually was willing to stick it out, but at the end of the day, couldn't overcome it. It sort of came to a head here. What did you see unfold last night, and what do you think happens next?
I think there are a great many of us who are still reeling from shock to the system this morning because what happened last night, we just never thought was possible. But we just traced the line back to a decade and a half ago when I was sitting here and seeing these populist forces that pushed out Congressman Eric Cantor in Virginia, that sent Paul Ryan into early retirement. These are the same forces that were at play to push out Kevin McCarthy. Now, people are drawing a stark contrast between Matt Gaetz and Kevin McCarthy, but I submit to you it's not that great. Kevin McCarthy's ambition has always been quite naked. And I
just think really interesting way to think about
I have seen it. I've watched him come up and I've seen him want this job, and he was going to stick to it because he does believe in good government and he does want people that come here and know how to pull the levers and have that desire. You can call these 8 people who ousted him people who don't want him there because he's an establishment type. I think it's bigger than that. I think we zoom out. And I think I also speak for the vast majority of Americans in the Republican Party that are frustrated by the members we send here with our taxpayer dollars who have an edict to spend and spend wisely. They come here and they have this budget. We bring in a certain amount, but we overspend. So what's happening here? I think we are in a moment where we are seeing the system burn down all the way to the ashes, and I'm actually not crying over it.
So, Maria, you are our Democrat here, and I have to tell you, there was a lot of conversation yesterday morning about what Democrats were going to do, and CNN reported that there were these last-minute entreaties from people who were close to McCarthy saying, hey, come on, please save us. I think the argument was a version of, well, better the devil you know, and you're not going to get anybody better. Democrats ultimately decided, they opened their caucus meeting yesterday playing a clip of McCarthy basically excoriating Democrats on Face the Nation, and they said, no, we can't do this. Do you think, can you help us understand a little bit more about that decision? And do you think there's any world in which Democrats come to regret it?
Well, first of all, let's look at why the decision was the way that it was. And you're right, a lot of it was Kevin McCarthy excoriating Democrats, not just over the weekend, but even in his speech last night, right? It was kind of jaw-dropping that he ends up blaming Democrats.
It's an institutional argument kind of in the middle. Yeah. When he was trying to get them to save them, it was up, down, up.
Exactly. When, in fact, it was Democrats who came to save him, frankly, and the country in terms of keeping the government open on Saturday, right? That was why we were able to keep the government open, because Democrats were the adults in the room working then with McCarthy, which
and I will give credit to McCarthy for also being an adult in the room on that.
Well, ultimately, yes, exactly.
But you're right.
I think he realized he realized that the whole party was going to sink if he didn't keep the government open. And so, yes, I gave him credit too for finally realizing that he had to do what a real leader does, right? But he needed Democrats to do it because he wasn't able to do that early on. And so,
but is the person they get next going to be worse for Democrats?
Well, we'll see. I mean, is it going to be worse for Democrats or worse for the country? What Democrats looked at last night in terms of the decision that was before them is they saw a Speaker of the House that, first of all, had no conversations with them about what he wanted to do in terms of trying to help him get to where he needed to be to stay as Speaker. They couldn't trust him was the bottom line, Kasie, right? Back in May, as you know, he came to an agreement with Democrats and with Joe Biden to raise the debt ceiling and to keep the levels of government spending where they are in order to avoid exactly what we have just gone through for the past several weeks.
Right.
He could not be trusted. He went back on that because of the